Why do people commit suicide? Well, let's find out. Is it the performance pressure that they're under, or is it the loneliness, or breaking relationships, maybe financial crisis, or maybe losing jobs, losing children, or maybe addiction, abuse, so many different reasons for people to end their own lives. But there's one thing that is common across all these things, and that is the pain. The psychological pain that a person is going through becomes so great that he cannot bear with it anymore. And so he decides to take a shortcut and end this pain forever. So let's ask this very important question. Is suicide the answer to stopping that pain? Will the pain stop when your life ends? And especially in that manner. Kevin Baldwin, he was at the Golden Gate Bridge to end his own life. And they say that anyone who jumps from this Golden Gate Bridge, that red hanging bridge in California, anyone who jumps off that bridge has a 98% chance of dying, because it's, I think, some 296 feet above, and the guy or somebody who jumps off the bridge, when they hit the water, it's like a lorry crashing into the wall. So the chances of survival are only 2%, and those 2% also suffer major injuries. So the guy was there and he was absolutely sure that he's going to end his life. So he jumped off, and he says that as soon as I left that railing, in the first millisecond, I realized that I had done wrong. He regretted his decision in the first millisecond of leaving that rail, and all he was begging was for the second chance. They said, God save me, God save me, I need a second chance. Then there was another guy, Kevin Hines, a 29-year-old American who was also at the Golden Gate Bridge, and he says the same thing, that as soon as I jumped off, I regretted my decision. There was another guy, an American Iraqi, Paul Al-Arab. He was there at the Golden Gate Bridge, and he says that when I jumped off that bridge, those 4 seconds before I hit the water were the longest in my life. And he said that I saw my daughter, my wife, and my family in those 4 seconds, and I was begging for a second chance. He was lucky. These 3 guys were among the 29 people who have so far survived a fall from Golden Gate Bridge. And all of them, all 29 of them, has regretted their decision. Then Harvard University compiled the results from 90 studies, and that presented a very staggering stat as well. And it said that 90% of the people who attempted suicide and survived, they chose not to die by suicide later on. That's 9 out of 10 people. That's 90 out of 100 people. And let's talk about this pain as well. Psychological pain, where does it come from? It's a very real thing. It's psychological. It doesn't present itself in a physical form, but it's very real and severe. And it comes from things like depression, which comes from things like stress disorders, and it comes from things like frustrations, and that comes from things like trying to control the uncontrollable, and that comes from things like circumstances and genes, etc. Now, what to do with this pain? Because it's a very real thing. So what do we do with this pain? Now, people usually consider 3 options. Number 1, suffering in silence. Deciding not to do anything about it and just suffer in silence. Number 2, treatment. That could include things like behavior therapies and psychodynamic therapies, NLP techniques and medication, etc. And then there is the shortcut suicide. And let's consider which of these options that you should consider. I would leave this suffering in silence alone, because that eventually may lead to suicidal tendencies if you don't do anything about it. Or you may have a very miserable life. So let's consider the other 2, the seemingly 2 things that might relieve you of this misery. The suicide, the shortcut, and then the treatment. Well, according to the National Mental Health Association, they say that the people who are suffering from depression and they're taking treatment, 80% of them report that the treatment works. Whereas on the other hand, there is 0% evidence that says that suicide works. Ever since Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, there would have been millions, if not billions of people who would have committed suicide, and not a single person out of them have come back and tell you this story that it has worked. There is zero evidence that the suicide works. There is 0% evidence that says that a suicide will stop your pain. So on one hand, there is a path which has an 80% success rate, and on the other hand, the shortcut has 0% evidence that it works. And you know what? The pain actually doesn't stop when you commit suicide. You just transfer it to the people who love you the most. Your mother, your father, your wife, your husband, your children, your siblings, and your friends. You just pass it on to them. It doesn't stop. So my question to you is that which choice would you make? Would you go down the path that has an 80% success rate or chance of 80% success, or you would choose a path that has a 0% evidence that it works? I expect you to make a wise choice. If you have any sort of mental health issue, seek help.